Let's take a moment to talk about what is widely considered to be the 5 basic types of effects. While there are all sorts of effects we can create, if we look a little closer, we find that they tend to fall into one of 5 categories. We have the sine wave effect, which will ramp in and out of a value evenly. We have a step effect, or a square wave effect, which will abruptly transition in and out of a value, which will give that kind of snapping feel. We have the ramp effect, which will fade into a value and then abruptly turn off. And then a burst effect, which will burst a fixture to a value and then slowly ramp it off. I usually keep 2 different types of these in my file. I will have these linear effects like we're seeing here, and then we'll also have their absolute effect equivalent. So here we're looking at the absolute effect equivalent of a sine wave effect that will fade in and fade out of a value. The absolute version of a square wave or a step effect, which will abruptly transition between 2 values. The absolute version of a ramp effect, and the absolute version of a burst effect. So those are the 4 basic types of effects. And the final one, of course, is the special effect. Your fire flickers, your TV gags, stuff like that. So when we start to approach organization, breaking them down into these 5 categories of non-focus effects is really helpful in starting to get our head around how we might want to lay out our organizational tools. Having a stock library of effects that can travel with you from show to show allow you to quickly get something up on stage without having to reinvent the wheel every time. And while we all do it slightly differently, there tends to be one sort of organizational system that we all tend to hover around. So we're going to explore that now. In this show file that we're working in here, we have a Magic Sheet organizational tool that is used to navigate effects. So if we look, for example, under our intensity effects, you can see here that this is actually broken up into that step, wave, pulse, and ramp idea of the 4 basic types of effects. And that actually translates across intensity, color, and beam effects. Focus effects, of course, are their own beasts and don't fall into that step, ramp, sine wave, or burst category. So they're usually treated a little differently. But many people have this sort of stock effect pool that they use, and then they can copy effects out of this into other buckets that they use for scene-by-scene organization. Numbering schemas here are also incredibly important. So you can see this particular file uses a decimal system, right? So we have 5931 for a step, and then .1, .2, .3, .4. And if we actually look closer at what these effects are, we can see that that decimal is representing the grouping here. So we have these different types of effects pre-built, and then we have them already pre-broken out into different groupings. So it becomes very easy for me to grab a set of fixtures and set them in different grouping configurations. So here I have, for example, a step in a spread. If I want them to function every 3 fixtures, I already have that pre-built ready to go. Same goes for my color and my beam effects, right? So here you can see that we've broken these down by different colors. So if I wanted to grab those same fixtures and I wanted to run a color step effect, I already have that pre-built ready to go using my standard color palettes that I have in my show. So when we're not going to get into the specifics of building a effect navigation system, and because how everyone wants to organize that is slightly different and up to you, I do want to talk about some of the basic concepts behind it. The idea is that you have a pool of effects that you pull from, and then you copy them to other places to use on a scene-by-scene or a specific instance-by-instance basis. Because if we edit the stock effect, that effect is going to change everywhere in our show that we use it. We probably want to use, for example, an intensity sine wave more than once and have it act differently throughout our show. So throughout these videos, we've created a pool of effects here that we've used as examples. Up here in the upper left-hand corner of my left screen, I've created a very rudimentary organizational system for keeping this stuff organized. All it is, it's a series of 10 snapshots that changes only this upper frame of my display. So I can actually cycle through various scenes, and you can see that my effect numbers are changing. So effect 1 through 20 is for scene 1, effect 21 through 40 is for scene 2, effect 41 through 60, scene 3, so on and so forth. The key here being, shows happen, and you know going in that you're going to need effects, and you're going to need presets, and you need focus palettes, and all the other reference data types that are specific per scene. So having buckets ahead of time preset to dump this stuff into comes in handy. So let's say we're recording a scene here, and I want to apply my absolute chase effect to these fixtures. If I was recording a show, what I would do is, okay, well, I know that I want to use this effect, but I also know that I'm going to want to make changes to this effect specific for this instance. So I'm going to take this absolute effect, and I'm going to copy it into my scene-specific snapshot here. So now I've made an exact copy of that, and I can run this chase. And now I can edit this effect for this specific scene instance without changing my base effect. So I leave that untouched. So here's a different version of that same magic sheet that we just looked at. This is actually my effects organizational system. And we can see here that it looks quite different, but the core concepts are still the same. Right? We have it broken out by our 4 basic types of effects, our step, our ramp, our burst, and our sine wave. I also have that grouping system that was in that magic sheet we just looked at as well. However, I don't use a decimal system. I use a 0 to represent a spread, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this actually goes up to 8. It's just not displayed for our groupings. Reason being is I actually find that easier to read in the ESD if I need to. But you can see I've broken that down by these 4 types of effects, and then I also have above the line and below the line versions of those as well. And I also have special effects and other stuff like that if I need to. In addition to having this, I also have the bucket system of someplace to put this. A big portion of creating some sort of organizational system is making sure that you have someplace to put these effects and these other types of reference data once you create them. You know that it's coming, so if you can prep it ahead of time, you're going to save yourself a lot of heartache earlier. So here actually you can see I have a bunch of preset, basically scene dividers that I can use. So for example here, I have a spot that I can put all of my effects related with this particular bank, in addition to focus, beam, color, and stuff like that. If I want to apply a 25-point over-the-line effect in this scene, I can just take that and copy it to here, and now I can use that version, but that doesn't interfere with my base effects here. Changes I make to this effect aren't going to change things throughout my entire show. So regardless of what system you use, it's important that you have a system and that you try to be coherent with it and consistent with it. Numbering schemas certainly help. One nice thing is these aren't actually that hard to build because it's really just creating an effect and then copying it, and then you can actually bulk edit these by selecting multiple different types of effects. So let's take a look at how we might start to build something like that. I have my basic sine, step, ramp, and burst effects here. So I'm just going to take these effects and I'm going to copy them. Do this, copy 2, and I'm just going to stick them here. So now I have my 4 basic types of effects. I'm just going to move some of these around. And again, I'm just doing this using double tapping copy 2 to move to. So now I have these 4 types of effects, and their default grouping is set to spread. If I want to make a system that has all of these with different groupings, I'm just going to copy all these effects. Okay, so now I have 4 exact copies of the effect. What's nice about this is I can actually bulk change these. So I'm just going to select all of these effects here. And even though they're different types of effects, I can come in and I can change their grouping to 1. And it's going to leave the effect type alone. So we can see if I go into my sine wave here, it's still a sine wave, but it's a sine wave with a grouping of 1. This is still a step wave or a square wave with a grouping of 1. This is a ramp with a grouping of 1. So then all I have to do into each type of these is once I get it laid out, it'll be a grouping of 2. 1, 2, 3, 4. Grouping of 3. So I've very quickly gone through and made these groupings. And the nice thing is because they're still just labeled generically, they're very easy to come in here and relabel. Even though I somewhat arbitrarily picked these particular tiles, I do indeed have a system, right? Every 10 is a new type of effect, and then the spreads are 1. Groupings of 1s are on the 2s, the groupings of 2s are on the 3s, groupings of 3s are on the 4. This is why in my base show file, all of the spreads start on 0, because then I have, the 1s would be the 1s, the 2s would be the 2s, the 3s would be the 3s. And I could go back and I could change that. A lot of times the way that these come to be is you do something and you organically kind of think about it and you're like, oh, it would be easier for me to remember, and I just move those around, and that's not a problem. But I very quickly created this organizational system. So now I can just come out here again and I can grab my masters, take my pixels to 50%, and then I can throw in every other step chase on them, or in every third step chase, or a spread step chase. And just like I could edit the grouping in bulk, if I wanted to edit my default timings in bulk, I can do that as well. 951 through effect 984. And notice I'm using my shift key and I'm just tapping on the tiles. Saves me a lot of keystrokes. Cycle time of 2. And now I've affected the cycle time for all of these effects in bulk. So I don't need to go through each one of these effects and do it. I very quickly made this change. And now it's just very easy for me to go through and choose these different effects. And then as I use these on my different scenes, if I want to use this, say I want to use this in scene 3, I'm just going to tap my snapshot button for scene 3. It's going to give me my predefined effects that I want to use for that scene, that number range. Take this, I'm going to copy it into there. And now I can even just replace that last effect. It's running, I can make my changes, and it's not going to affect my base stock effect. While creating an effects organizational system may seem like a daunting task, it's not as difficult as it may seem, and it doesn't need to be as complex or involved as the two we've just looked at. It's all about knowing where to find things when you're looking for them, and having destinations ready to go once you do. Start small and logical, and grow it over time as your needs change.